Is this a budget you will support?
So that's not a decision that we are making right now, and the reason for that is the following. While we fought for certain things in the budget that are very important, that are going to give relief to people, we have some serious concerns, and I want to hear from the Prime Minister what his plan is to address those concerns.
Okay, here to spell out those concerns is the man who's on the clip, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. Mr. Singh, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Well, what is it exactly you don't like about this budget at this point, or need some clarity on?
Well, there's a number of things that we're concerned about. We are concerned that the disability benefit that folks living with disabilities have been waiting for a long time has come out at $200 a month. $200 is very insignificant or not enough to deal with the high cost of living that people are struggling with right now. So what's the plan to raise that up to an amount that is sufficient? What's the plan to address that?
Can I just ask you specifically on that? Because it's about $1 billion a year when you break it down, rising to a high of $1.4 billion, but not for another 5 or 6 years. The coalition of people looking for that in this budget, Neil Hetherington from the Daily Bread Food Bank says it needs to be between $10 and $12 billion a year. When you look at their commitment to hitting their targets, do you think they can go that high? Is that what you want to see, or do you want to just see it bigger than it is right now?
Well, I know that the amount right now is just not good enough. So I want to know what their plan is around that. How are they going to raise it to the expectations that the people in the community have? And in fact, the reality is cost of living is so high. So what are they doing about that? We are proud of the things that we were able to force this government to do, but there's concerns. We were able to get the rental benefit in there to protect people who are worried about losing their homes. We're able to get the free diabetes medication and devices and free birth control. And we're able to bring in that school lunch program, something that New Democrats have long fought for. But we are concerned about things like the 5,000 public sector employees that are being cut. How does that not mean cut to services for Canadians? So we're concerned about these things.
So on that, because for people at home who haven't seen this in the budget, there is a plan to reduce through attrition, retirements, and departures the workforce from about 368,000 to 363,000 over a period of time. Now, there's been a growth in the public sector in Canada, during the Liberal government's time. $5,000 jobs, if it's not direct layoffs, is a very small percentage of the total workforce. Do you think that is too much?
I just want to understand what the plan is, because we've been very critical of the outsourcing to private consulting firms, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars. So the government's outsourcing to that massive amount, which we should stop. We think the government should stop doing that. And then they're also getting rid of 5,000 workers. So make sense to us. We're concerned about that.
There's no windfall profits tax like you'd been advocating for. There's no wealth tax like you've been advocating for, though there is an increase in the inclusion rate for capital gains that will hit the wealthiest 0.13% and affect corporate earnings as well. What are your thoughts on that? This is something the business community is pushing back against. Where are you?
Well, we've said for a long time we want to see tax fairness, but our particular focus is this. We know that the major reason that the cost of living is up is because of corporate greed, whether it's the high cost of groceries, the fact that we pay some of the highest cell phone and internet fees in the world, whether you can't buy a home or rent a home, either because of speculators or corporate landlords that are both scooping up housing and driving up the cost of it. Corporate greed is a problem. And this was an opportunity in this budget to tackle corporate greed. And the Liberals failed to do so. We know the Conservatives will never do it, and now the Liberals have shown they're also not willing to go after corporate greed.
But is corporate greed really the underlying cause in, for example, housing affordability? I mean, you had this lack of supply in Toronto and in Vancouver in the last half of the last decade that led to people spreading out to the lower mainland of the GTA, which juiced prices there, and then measures were brought in to constrain that, and then the pandemic hit. Interest rates went way down, people saved some money, they started speculating on homes, and supply couldn't keep up, and now we're in an interest rate crisis that has hammered people. I mean, there's a lot more complicated factors going into any of these problems than corporate greed, as you say, or the carbon tax, as the Conservatives say.
Well, corporate greed is a significant factor. There's no question about it. If you look at the cost of housing compared to what people earn in terms of salary, that has gone up significantly, astronomically, really. And you look at speculation and you look at corporate landlords that are really driving up the price of housing, scooping up affordable housing. It is a significant factor, and it's something that hasn't just happened overnight. It's been over a period of time, right. But it is a major reason. Economists agree that corporate greed in housing, in cell phone prices, in internet prices, in our grocery stores is a major driver of the cost of living. In fact, across the boards, economists have shown that inflation has been significantly contributed by corporate greed, using inflation as cover to drive up the cost of things.
You say you don't know how you're going to vote on this, but your supply and confidence agreement, unless something has happened, is still in place, and it says you have to support the government or will support the government on confidence votes as long as they adhere to the principle of no surprises. I don't think this budget would qualify as a surprise. I mean, is this something you could really vote against, or are you just going to try to get a little bit extra out of the government before you say yes?
We always have the right to withdraw our support at any point in time. And so what right now we're saying is that there's some significant concerns we have. We are really worried about the failures to address corporate greed, the failures to explain how $200 is good enough for people living with disabilities. So we're concerned about these things. I want to hear a clear explanation of what the path is to address these concerns from the Prime Minister before we make our decision.
Okay, clear explanations. I have to ask you about consumer carbon price.
Sure.
Because I know that since your speech at the Broadband Institute last week, it has been the impression by a lot of people that the New Democrats are reconsidering their support for that. It hasn't changed at the moment, but you say you want to develop a comprehensive climate plan that is fairer to people and stops dividing people. Consumer carbon pricing has become very unpopular, whether you think it's a good idea or not. Are you reconsidering your support for that as your plan evolves? It sounds to me like you are.
Well, our position hasn't changed.
I get that.
And consumer pricing on carbon is just one part of it. What we've highlighted as a specific concern, for example, is that Canadians are saying it's unfair to us, especially since a recent report came out highlighting how much these subsidies are, that the federal government, the Liberal government, is giving billions of dollars in subsidies to highly profitable oil and gas companies. The report puts it at $18 billion, when they are not spending $14 billion that was earmarked to give Canadians heat pumps, to help with public transit. That's unfair.
I get
and that's
that.
a part of what we're saying is unfair.
But, you know, subsidies for fossil fuels, they've committed to phasing it out, you know, as part of their commitments to COP, so it's a question of that. And the other programs that aren't being spent, some of that is just the growing pains of, you know, execution of competent government that are challenges in every program. But you gave that speech and made that statement. And look, you can move away. Bob Canoe has done this to commercial carbon pricing. Doesn't think it's something consumers should have to do, but industrial pricing is something that you have said could be used. But are you reconsidering your support? I know you haven't changed it yet, but you seem to be sending signals that maybe after David Eby has his election, you might have a plan that doesn't include carbon pricing.
Well, what we're saying is these are elements of the plan that we would put in as New Democrats. We want a plan that is fair to working people, a plan that reduces our emissions, ultimately that's the whole goal, and a plan that takes on big polluters. That's what we want. Right. We should contrast that with conservatives who are fine with big polluters dumping into our waters, polluting as much as they want, polluting the air, the land, and the water. That's wrong. And the Liberal approach, which is not feeling fair to consumers, fair to Canadians, fair to people, that's a problem as well.
But I'm happy to do the comparison with the other parties, but I need, I guess, a yes or a no on whether you're reconsidering the consumer carbon price, because it sounds to me like you are. And you know, a simple yes, and it's a legitimate position to have given the division it is causing, and you don't want to lose popular support for climate action. So is that a correct assessment of where you are, that you know you have not changed your position right now, but you are reconsidering it and whether it fits into an NDP plan?
It is correct that we have not changed our position right now. That part is correct. Yeah. What we are proposing is a plan that should address these three elements that I laid out. That's what we want. We want a plan that's fair, that reduces emissions, that takes on big polluters. That's the plan we want to see.
Okay. Fair enough. How long are you going to give the government to give you clarity on the measures in the budget before you decide whether or not you're going to stick with them on this?
Well, we haven't made that decision yet, but we are going to raise these concerns directly with the Prime Minister, and we're looking for clear explanations.
Okay, so are we talking days, are we talking weeks, or could this, you know, the approval process for a budget, this could go into June, July, who knows how long. What's your sense of a timeline on this?
I guess the ball is going to be in the Prime Minister's court and the Liberals' court. They've got to explain to me how their lack of clarity around the $200 for people living with disabilities, the 5,000 workers being cut, the lack of a plan addressing the infrastructure gap on Indigenous housing and infrastructure, and we want to see why they're not addressing corporate greed as a major driver of the cost of living going up. So I want to hear some explanations on these.
Okay, and what's the timeline for when you're going to give us your comprehensive climate plan? Because there could be an election at any point, and you say you have this middle ground. When are we going to see it?
You'll understand that we're not going to release our plan now.
A timeline, though.
But we will have our plan for the upcoming election on a number of fronts. We'll lay out what we want to do for Canadians to tackle corporate greed, build homes that are affordable, to bring down the price of groceries. So we'll have our plan. We've already laid out many of those elements, and we're going to lay out more as we get closer to an election.
Okay, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. We're going to keep asking these questions about carbon pricing, but thank you very much for joining us today. Well, Conservative leader Pierre reacted to the budget in the House of Commons just last hour. He said, not surprisingly, Conservatives will vote against the Liberal government's budget. For the record, we did request that a Conservative MP come on the show tonight, but no one was made available. Here's the leader.
Here we have today a ninth consecutive deficit, with the budget still not balancing itself. And everything on which the Prime Minister spends gets worse and more costly. He is spent, and Canadians are broke. Conservatives will vote against this wasteful, inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians, and that's why we need a carbon tax election to replace him with a common-sense Conservative government.
Jean-Denis Garon is the Bloc's national revenue critic, and he joins me now. It's good to see you again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What is the central issue with the Bloc in this budget? It seems to come down to jurisdiction, and the federal government's barging into Quebec's territory with this.
Yeah, as usual, I might say.
Even with billions of dollars, it's not okay?
Well, that's exactly the point. The point is not the amounts of money that are spent. The important point is how it's going to be spent. So this is a budget under the seal of centralization and of intrusion within Quebec's fields of jurisdiction. So we have new conditions today in municipal zoning. They're even going to tell Hydro-Quebec how to tariff electricity with their clean energy subsidies. We have intrusions in terms of health with this dental care, with the pharmacare. Also, you're going to tell me that the money isn't all there, but the intent is there. So there is absolutely no way we can support that. And what we've been asking for a few days, and the government knew that, was for an opting out, the possibility to opt out for Quebec. We respect other provinces' preferences, but there should be an opting out option for Quebec, and it's not in there.
Well, it has been the historic pattern, though, of asymmetrical federalism, that the rest of Canada deals with whatever the government spells out, and Quebec cuts a deal. And we've seen, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith tabling legislation modeled on the legislation that exists in Quebec, suggesting that they want that sort of treatment, though not quite acknowledging that when Quebec cuts a deal on housing, for example, Quebec brings money to the table. So on dental care, is there a way to bridge that gap outside of a flat rejection? On pharmacare, is there a way to bridge that gap, or is it just a carve-out for Quebec?
Well, Quebec is different, and we want the other provinces to acknowledge that. They have their own requests. They can do that as suits them. But I mean, it's not total rejection, as you say. It's not how we see it. What we say is that if Quebec wants to offer Quebecers new services, new health services, the money should flow to Quebec. And the reason is simple. It's because we want to have those services delivered in an efficient way by the government that has the competence to do it. The federal government doesn't manage any hospitals. Well, there's a few exceptions, but it doesn't. Quebec does. We already have public dental care for children in Quebec. So now it's being enlarged within the federal program, but the infrastructure is there. Those dentists, they are already logged into this public system, so the infrastructure is there. So our goal, in the end, is to deliver services properly, efficiently, at a lower cost, and that's absolutely not what this budget will deliver Quebecers.
So Jagmeet Singh was just sitting there saying he's not prepared to support this budget at this time. He has some questions on a number of programs. You're reacting a lot like your leader.
Is this the time of the interview when we laugh?
So well, your leader. Your leader did that, and I guess maybe you rehearsed this in caucus.
I'm sure that there's no NDP member of parliament that has their electoral signs in their cars right now.
So, well, you're not buying a threat whatsoever, right? I mean, this has been a pattern with Mr. Singh that where he voices an initial skepticism about whatever the government announces and then tries to pressure to get some changes along the priority lines that he lays out. Do you anticipate that's where this is going as opposed to a real threat to the confidence agreement?
Well, I mean, it's a budget that's already written in orange ink. I mean, you can see it. You can see all those programs. And the funny thing, and I think I told that to you last year, was that the money sometimes is not provisioned, but the intent is there. And I think the NDP, they're selling their credibility for not much.
What is your view on when the election will be? If it's not going to fall over this budget, the government sort of engineered its own demise in 2021 when it went early, saying we need to have a conversation about how do we spend coming out of COVID. If the NDP aren't going to abandon them, as you and your leader have suggested, do you think this goes all the way to October 2025? Do you think there's another budget in our future and then a full 18 months of this parliament?
I don't know. I don't know if the NDP is going to have the self-respect to have the election called earlier on. But I'm going to give you a politician's answer, but I actually mean it. Quebecers have a third way. They have a third way. They've decided to elect 32 Bloc members of Parliament last election, and we're the only province where people have this third way, and I think it's more important than ever. And I think that when the election will be called, Quebecers will be listening to the Bloc a lot.
Do you have any concerns about where the Conservatives are in your province right now? I mean, they are trying to grow there, and they have made some gains broadly as they grow right across the country. They lead in basically every jurisdiction right now except Quebec.
But they don't lead in Quebec, and partly because they've been lying to Quebecers for a long time about the carbon tax that actually doesn't apply to Quebec. They've recognized it last week. So when I'm in my riding, when I'm on the field, when I'm listening, is people being fed up with being lied to. So I wish them good luck with their lies.
So look, outside of the jurisdictional issues, when you look at the actual intention of the programs and the overall spending priorities of the government, because, you know, set the social programs and jurisdiction aside, there's investment tax credits here for electric vehicle investments. This is something with Northvolt and others, your province wants to be a big player in. Do you see value in any of sort of the industrial policy laid out? And also, what are your thoughts on the capital gains tax increase? Well,
there's value in some of those measures that are within their fields of competences. But I mean, when we're talking about intrusions, it's not a minor thing. You know, people, what do they care about right now? They care about housing. They care about healthcare. They care about.
They care about results, though. I think they're kind of tired of the jurisdictional squabbling.
And that's the point. And look at housing. They had this supposedly magnificent national housing strategy. Quebec's had been waiting for almost 4 years to have the money because we're the only province where we have permanent programs for building social housing. They didn't recognize it. They wanted to impose more conditions. And what do we have now? Poor people in the streets. You call that delivering services? I don't call it that.
But on the economic front, because that helps dealing with service delivery, Quebec is, a green energy player.
Yeah.
Hydro-Quebec is an early mover on a lot of the green transition. What do you make of the merits of the electric vehicle credits and how that might help the economy?
I mean, those credits already existed. They're going to exist. I think there's a transition to be done. Quebec is way ahead. But you just told that Quebec is a leader in terms of green energy. Now what they're doing is that last year they've announced that provincial public utility companies could qualify for that green energy subsidy. Yep. Now they're laying out conditions and they're telling Hydro-Quebec, it's not a joke, I'm serious, they're telling Hydro-Quebec how to tariff Quebecers for its electricity.
If they want
how
the
can we
federal
vote
money.
for that? I mean, there's absolutely no circumstance under which any reasonable Quebec MP should vote for that budget. I can't even see that.
Okay. Well, the Prime Minister happens to be a Quebec MP, so I think he's probably going to vote for the budget. But obviously, you and your Bloc.
Maybe. I can tell you I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I got you. Jean-Denis Garon, Bloc's national revenue critic. Always appreciate you taking the time on the fiscal aids. Appreciate it.
Thank you.